Hello, I'm Ash Khandekar. I'm the editor of Opera Now magazine, and I'm delighted to be here at Cooper Hall today to talk to Aidan Lang, who is one of the foremost administrators of opera companies. You've worked all around the world, and he's currently the General Director of Welsh National Opera. Aidan, welcome, and do tell us a bit about your career.
Yeah, well, I suppose I count myself lucky of having made the journey from being a practitioner into managing the companies. And I think that helps hugely because I started out as a director. I worked my way up through Glyndebourne. I was at Welsh National Opera for 6 years and then became an artistic director of a company. And there's a journey there, there's an understanding and a change of your perspective on opera, I think. So by the time you become a general director running the company, I think it's useful to know, when a technical director comes and tells you something, you think, come on a minute, I know you have me on there, or, it may be an imperative for some artistic decision. Because you have to be balanced. You have to always decide what is the artistic imperative against the sheer practicality of resources to do something. And the role of a general director is the CEO and the artistic director rolled into one. So you do need to have a certain element of detachment. But that was my progression. I was very lucky to go off to the Netherlands to be the first artistic director of a company which is still there called Opera South or Opera Zout, a touring company. And what was interesting in the Netherlands was the funding is such that it was certainly there was no reason to go into deficits. It was a combination of funding and also the fact that the touring venues would buy what we did. So the box office imperative lay on them, not on the company. And that gives you a very comfortable position. So as long as you don't overspend, which you'd know in advance, you can carry on.
So this is interesting that you in a way, you were a sort of a poacher that became the gamekeeper, that you were a director who was very involved in the creative side of things, and then suddenly you had to think about budgets and money. And is that an easy transition to make? And did it make you respect the managements that were saying, no, you can't have any more money beforehand?
Well, I think working both in the Netherlands and then at Buxton Festival, where I was artistic director as well, working very closely with a general manager, that's where it was very clear that you have to be sensible and be balanced. I remember an occasion at Buxton where it was a show I was doing and our design was a small amount over budget. And there was one design piece which was going to tip it. We were talking about £6,000 or so. It seems little, but actually at Buxton we'd already hit our target for the festival. So, and we had sold a lot of tickets as well. So there wasn't an awful lot left. We were in a comfortable position. And the decision I was faced with was should I as director, hang on to this piece of scenery or should I say no? Because by spending that 6,000, I am then requiring us to sell £6,000 more tickets to balance the festival. And Buxton, we turned a corner financially, and we're in a comfortable position. But it was comfortable, but only comfortable. It wasn't luxurious. And I think that was an interesting moment because my design colleague, he said, okay, what we'll do is we will use that piece, we'll hide that with a curtain, we'll kind of use the finale but not really see it. And he sketched it, and in rehearsal what you tend to have is a photocopy of each of the sets you put on the wall for the singers to see. So he took down the photo of the scene in question and put his sketch up. But more pertinently, what he did, he took the bit of set model, snapped it in 4 and chucked it in the bin. And even my general manager colleague, Glyn Foley, sort of winced. And Nigel Hook, the designer, said, no, that is the new reality, pointing to his sketch on the wall. And of course, actually, the scene was better in the new reality anyway. But that taught me that there are many different ways to do things. And if there's a budgeting problem, you can't just always say, no, we must have this, just applying a bit of creativity.
And of course, that feeds back into what the audience pays for tickets, presumably, because that's always been a problem with opera. There's been this perception that it's too expensive. It's too, it's just far too much for people to afford. Are you, now that you run an opera company, well, you run many, but how aware are you of affordability, and how important is that?
Yeah. Well, I think here in the UK, our tickets, we have a wide range. And if you look at the price of a West End ticket now, certainly for a musical, most opera tickets, certainly in the regions, are less than you would pay in West End for a not particularly good seat. So in real terms, opera is priced very favourably, but it's about perception as well. And what people perceive as the value for their investment, if you like, in buying a ticket. What's quite interesting is that I did a sort of market research project shortly before leaving Seattle, and we had 4 of the workshops over 2 days. And during the course of one of them, I'm behind the glass with my marketing team, and someone talked about their ticket price and what they paid. And we had their customer record in front of us on our screens. We were going, no, you didn't. No, he was way off. And the person running, the moderator, ran round the room, and everybody was way off. So at the end of that session, the moderator comes and says, things you'd like us to interrogate. We said, yes, interrogate that for each of the groups. So out of 40 people over 4 sessions, everybody was completely off a chart as to their memory of what they had paid for the ticket. I mean, we're not talking a few dollars. People said, oh, I paid $75. We go, no, you paid $225, or I paid $150. No, you paid $50.
And what's that to do with their experience of the performance?
So this was the thing, that because the question was actually about your perceived value. Did you get value for money? And people said they had, but they couldn't actually remember the money they had paid in order to get the value, which was a fascinating insight, because we get very concerned about will people be able to afford it? But what you should be thinking is about what is the proposition, what am I offering to people, and how do I market that? You're marketing an experience, not a ticket price.
So to some extent, as a general director, you're the arbitrator, you're the negotiator, the broker between an audience and a creative team. And how much do creative teams really understand audiences, and how much do they get very wrapped up in, oh, we've got to be creative, we've got to do something different, we've got to do something exciting, we've got to do something imaginative. Of course, they have to do, but in the end, how when do they really think, well, what is the audience going to think of this?
Well, to come back to your original question, indeed, my journey has taught me the other side. So when I was a director, I don't think I did think about that. And it's absolutely right that creative teams are thinking about their job. And you've put it in one, that the company is the intermediary between that vision, that work. We're transmitting the piece to the audience. And so if there is an instance where something is way off budget, what I like to do is talk to the team and say, okay, what are you trying to say with this scene? And talk with them. And I think this is where having been a practitioner helps, because, I've been talking through the creation of a new project anyway, so that's part of the process. But it does help, I think, to crystallize it down to what are you trying to say here? What do you want this piece or this scene or whatever to mean? And if it can't work that way, how else can we evolve it? And you can actually always find an alternative way. But you've got to do that, because you can't recklessly say, art must prevail if the resources are not there to do it.
It's interesting for me because, I sometimes go to the opera and you have very conceptual productions, very abstract, very, perhaps, very different from what you would expect the work to be. So, modernized, which can be wonderful or can be awful. They can be presented in incredibly different ways theatrically. Sometimes things just don't work, and the curtain goes down and the audience is just dispirited, and you sort of think, well, as a general manager or general director of a company, at what point can you step in and say, look, I know this isn't going to work, we've got to change this, and how much is it actually an oil tanker that started to move and you cannot stop it?
Yeah, and opera is a bit like that. So I think the answer is it has to be done in a dialogue before the company accepts the concept, the design. So the process is, should be, that once the invitation is made, and I like to I don't just ring someone up saying, come do a show. It's important to talk to that person, get a sense of what their view is likely to be. Not to dictate it in any way, but to understand it. And certainly in the past, I can think of a couple of moments when I felt in those discussions that something was going to go awry. So in the politest way, you sort of join the conversation and can gently steer it off that rock. But I can think of times as a director when the first time I have given this, gone with the design to the company, that's the first time the company have seen it, which is catastrophic, because if they don't like it, it's actually quite hard for them to say, Aiden, that's rubbish, let's go away. And so often, when a show, I've watched a show when I think this should not have got beyond the model presentation, because it's clearly baked into that concept, is something which isn't going to chime in with the audience of the country concerned. So I think you have to be strong, but the solution is to monitor it and be in discussion.
I mean, in some ways, other media like film and television and theatre, they have different processes where things are tested beforehand. I mean, a film will go to a test audience, theatre will have previews. With opera, you're just there. The curtain opens, the audience is there, and whatever they think of it, they think of it. So in some ways, it's really hard, because that sort of evolutionary process, in a way, doesn't involve an audience view of things.
This is true. I mean, new work, yes, to a certain extent, but even then, getting a team of singers, even if they're just there for the workshopping process, they've still got to learn the piece. It's not quite like a play. You and I could read a new two-hander and do a reading, and the director or writer could get a sense of it. But if we were giving even a two-hander new work, we'd take a while to get our way through it. So that even the workshopping process is nowhere near as sophisticated and subject to change as it is for a play. And even I think the rhythm of the rehearsal is different. Singers, and it's to do with the pulse of the music propelling the drama. There comes a point I found in rehearsal where it's very hard to make massive wholesale changes. If you had some actors and said, we've got the design all wrong, the fireplace shouldn't be on that side of the stage, the fireplace needs to be there, and the door needs to be there. An actor would have no problem at all just switching. But actually singers in rehearsal, because of the pulse of the music, tend to find anchor points. And if you suddenly, change the door to a fireplace, I can guarantee a singer would try and exit through a fireplace, because they'd be so fixed in the geography of the production which they got to at that point in rehearsal. So the rhythms are so different, you need to be very mindful of that. So when changing notes or such a thing in a new piece would be very hard for singers to do.
Well, it was interesting what you said before about the different cultural contexts, that because opera is often co-produced across countries and different cities around the world, you'll have something that's made for Barcelona, then it comes to London, then it goes to Sydney, then it goes to Seattle. You're talking about it as a production, a concept that's then applied to lots of different places in the world. That presumably is a huge challenge, because all audiences are different and their reference points are different.
And I think especially in comedy, I often say, doing a co-production with Barcelona, what makes them laugh on the Ramble is not necessarily what makes them laugh at the Welsh Valleys. So I think you need to be very careful on international co-production with comedy, but in general, you need to understand your audience. I like co-producing, and I've done a lot of it, and I've tended to try and find partners who share the artistic approach which I want whatever company it is to, the direction I want that company to take. But you do need to be mindful of your own audience. Theatre is a bit like a language. That the style of theatre, what one audience in one country are used to, is not necessarily what another one is used to.
So here's a little interesting exercise for you. You've recently worked, your recent career has taken you from New Zealand, where you were the director of opera at New Zealand Opera, then to Seattle Opera, and now to Welsh National Opera. So 3 really quite disparate geographical areas. How would you characterise the audience in each, and how did you respond to the audience in each?
Yeah, so I would say in New Zealand, I think because of the relatively small amount of work generated there, plus a really sort of open attitude to trying something, the New Zealand audience is incredibly open and up for it. Even if they don't like it, they'll sort of say, "Good on you, mate, for doing it." And that was very refreshing coming. I went to New Zealand in 2006, where I think there were rumblings in opera audiences in the early noughties that there was a bit of a pushback against a more conceptualized approach. I think we were beginning to feel it then. And it was refreshing, actually, to go to New Zealand for 8 years and find pleasure in that. We actually took Chris Alden's Turandot from Welsh National Opera, and which was always somewhat contentious. It was by no means it was Chris Alden production. It was abstracted. It was very hard hitting. It wasn't the easy fairy tale that people expected, and it was a rave hit in New Zealand. Chris said, "You have got me the best ever reviews I've ever had in my life." He almost didn't want them to be so good but they just got it in a way that British audience struggled. America is different. I was in Seattle. Seattle is a very progressive city, but I don't think its opera audience were as aware of the conceptual element to opera as I think they thought they were. So, undoubtedly, when I took the Peter Konvichny Traviata from E&O, this upset an awful lot of our older audience members, but actually had a fantastic effect on new and a younger audience. So maybe on the one hand it was a tactical error, but actually we did it deliberately to make a stand. It wasn't just to show a more advanced way of looking at Traviata, a non-crinoline Traviata. It was a conscious decision to put Seattle Opera within the bars and the conversation of the city as a whole. So we knew we were going to upset some people, but we did it deliberately. I say not to give them a Rite of Spring walking out feel, but to make them think that Traviata doesn't have to always be set in 1850 with large crinolines, because that way today, for an audience who really don't understand what the 19th century French society was like, and therefore sit behind a costume piece, we felt they were missing the point that Verdi is making that piece. So it was a conscious decision, but of course it upsets people at the same time. And I think that's the attitude. You have to think about your audience, think where they are, find a production which, if it's coming from overseas, where your best judgment is it's going to strike a chord to resonate with the audience.
So you've been very diplomatic. You've told us about the New Zealand audience and the audience in Seattle in America, but not about.
That's what I did. Well, of course, what's fascinating about W&O as a touring company is what is the W&O audience? Is it Cardiff? Is it Oxford? Is it Liverpool? And it's all of them, and they are very different. And that is a challenge because in Seattle we transformed the average age of the audience, which plummeted down because of the program we were doing. You can't do that anywhere near so easily when you're dealing with 9 different cities. And I think what our approach is dependent on our hubs. We actually operate in Birmingham, in North Wales, in Llandudno, and Southampton, and now Plymouth. We operate hubs first and foremost for our community work, but we're now looking at a new program which enhances that work, including creating pieces. And the idea is to make work which belongs to each of those communities and not try and play the same piece in each city. Now, I'm not talking about our main stage work, but sort of mid-scale work and devised work and participatory work. So that the issues in North Wales, and we're looking now to Cornwall as well for the first time, Cornwall or North Wales are going to be very different from the West Midlands, and not try and make one size fits all.
So this is interesting that, in a world of globalization and the idea that, everybody can tap into the streaming of an opera or whatever it is, that we're online, everything's accessible from everywhere. You're actually looking at a much more localized, in a way, much more kind of, sort of independent high street type experience than a global experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And because I think in opera, arts viewing anyway is a personal thing, and you can make a collective, I think, if you're in one place, because you can tap into what that city, that community are talking about, what are the issues, and you can formulate your programming accordingly. And I think that is the way to go, precisely because so much is available anyway. To make a real mark in people's lives, I think we now need to be speaking to them as individuals, not as a mass market.
So rather than thinking of these things as tours, are you almost thinking of them as sort of local festivals, as almost sort of, you're kind of embedding yourself in communities, rather than thinking of yourself as the great national company that's being sort of, telling everybody what you think, sort of thing?
Absolutely. And, in New Zealand, what was interesting, although we played in Auckland and Wellington and later Christchurch, we used the local symphony orchestra and had a chorus in each city. And the difference was remarkable because each city considered the opera company theirs, whereas the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra and Royal New Zealand Ballet, who tour, they were deemed national companies based in Wellington. And their respective CEOs said to me, we really envy you the attachment which your companies felt in those cities. That they're Wellington-based, and they felt they can never sort of get inside the skin of the Auckland market. And Auckland is a third of the population, so it's the important city. And I think that's a lesson learned there, that you need as a company to have some genuine, authentic link with the audience you're dealing with. Otherwise, you are just a touring company, like a big touring musical coming through as well. And if we want to offer something which is higher than just the entertainment proposition of Les Mis, then it's important to have tools to make those connections. So we've decided we can't do these hubs everywhere. So we've decided on key zones, Cardiff, of course, North Wales, because half our money comes from Arts Council Wales, and two strategic areas in England, i.e. the West Midlands and the South West, which is very underserved anyway. So we're making a decision to do that.
So it's interesting, this idea of a national company, because you are Welsh National Opera. I mean, I remember once talking to somebody who runs English National Opera about the fact that, in what sense is it national? I mean, and I said, and they said you would never tour. They said, well, we do go to the old Vic, or the young Vic to do. And I said, well, that's half a mile away from it's hardly touring. So, I mean, how much responsibility do you feel you have to Wales as a big cultural institution in Wales, and how much do you have to sort of, in a way, reflect the Welsh aspirations for culture?
Yeah. Well, firstly, this hubs model is really helping us do that, because you're right. I think when I think back to 30 years ago when I worked there, there was a genuine discussion as whether we should move to Birmingham because it made more sense for a touring perspective. And I think the Welshness of Welsh National Opera over those 30 years has ebbed and flowed a bit. But now we're in a world where it's very important. Welsh language standards are part of our work. We need to be, if not bilingual per se, but have a respect for the Welsh language and give it equal importance to the English language. And with a devolved government, it's quite interesting how their international strategy, we're mentioned as a national asset, and we actually entered in discussion with the new opera house in Morocco, in Rabat and Morocco. We took the orchestra over there. It's actually by Zaha Hadid, ironically, and It's an extraordinary building. And it was interesting, they were very keen on us coming, and I'm sure we will end up going there. precisely, they said, because A, you're not London, and B, that you are a national company, not a company just of a city. So this was very important, and I think, especially with Brexit, it's one aspect of our work that can greatly help the Welsh economy and act as flag bearers, if you like, for Wales on an international scale. Touring an opera company is expensive for anybody, but I think that it was clear, and also Dubai, we actually have a new work which is going to be part of a Dubai Expo, which got cancelled, is now in 2021. But again, they were very taken by the idea of a national company, not, just from Hamburg or wherever, or Bordeaux, but and the Welsh government certainly are, helping us in that. They have a base in Dubai anyway, so that international diplomacy element of us is an important part.
So we've got sort of halfway through an interview without actually mentioning the C word, COVID, and you came to Welsh National Opera in July last year, and we're obviously planning ahead because opera takes a long time to plan. I mean, how much of tell us first of all, how has COVID affected your business?
Well, the planning, first of all. I was on the Opera Europa video conference, and I have to say every single company in Europe is going through the same things, and that is the long-term planning is completely out of the window. Partly because, if at all possible, we want to postpone rather than cancel. It means that the artists who have been out of work now for 9 or 10 months, at least they've got something in the diary to look forward to. And that means, of course, everything shuffles along. So, opera plans which are normally 2-3 years set in advance have all been thrown out of the window. And even on a short-term basis, you're ready to go and then you're told the theatres are closed and you have to go back again. So, that doesn't help. But also it's not helped by our touring model. That is, we get 3 shows together in a quite short band and then have a long performance run of all 3. So if the return to work chimes in with our rhythms, we're okay. But if we say, okay, you can go into the theatre and tomorrow, and there's 2 weeks of a tour left, well, we can't get it ready in time. So we're taking a view now to we're gunning for autumn of 21 as the time when we're going to be back. And it seems a long way away. And of course, we're going to have things ready to go, but we have no certainty. And that's been very, very hard. It's been very hard to motivate about 125 people of our staff, the orchestra, chorus, technicians. It's very easy to forget the technical crews as well, just to keep them going through a period where we know we can't give them any work.
And what do you think it's done to audiences? Do you think, have you managed to keep your audiences engaged, or are you worried about whether they'll come back? What are your feelings about?
It's hard because within the data laws of the UK, we don't have the sort of knowledge and direct communication with audiences in the way you would in America. Obviously, our donors, we keep in contact. We have lots of Zoom events put on especially for them, which have a fantastic attendance. But it's very hard. And so the big question is, will people have forgotten us? And that sounds a bit melodramatic, but it's hard enough when you're only visiting a city 2 times a year to keep that contact going at the best of times. And if it's been a year and a half when people's entertainment options have shifted, assuming that everyone's going to flood back, it would be very rash indeed. In terms of whether they want to come back, there's been a lot of talk about a nervous return because of the virus. I think we're much more optimistic that there's been a lot of evidence that people are coming back willingly, and there's no way we're going to be at full audiences for a while yet.
Well, what's your feeling about that? And when do you think we will be back up to strength?
Put it this way, we're budgeting our autumn 21 on the basis of about 80 to 90% of what we would have been. And we do that talking with all the other organisations as well. So that's the sort of feeling. And I think we did that budget before the vaccine came on the horizon, so that will only help matters. But so I'm not as pessimistic of everyone staying away until the virus is completely gone. I think people have gone shopping again as soon as restrictions have been lifted. So I think you must allow people a little bit of their own sense of their own security and to make a judgment call on it. But we're not going to be back, at full houses anytime within a good year or so. So we have to make decisions accordingly, be it the amount of productions we mount or indeed the budget scale for those shows in alignment with its income.
And will you be, presuming that we won't suddenly wake up and the virus will have gone away, will you be thinking about how to perform safely, and what sort of measures are sort of in your mind?
Well, so we have 2 productions which we've got lined up, which to intend to take out in spring when we can. One of which is Barbara Seville. We are aiming to stage it as much as we can, allowing that we have to play to a certain distance. So that work is going on, is being mapped out. The other thing we're doing is Trovatore. Now we feel with the large chorus numbers and that's a no-go in any time soon to be done in a conventional way. So we'll have a much more inventive way to that, probably with a static chorus, allowing an acting space where there's enough room for that distancing, and obviously orchestra separated out in the pit. It's remarkable, actually. We talk about 2-3 meter distances, and just recently we've had our full chorus on the stage of St David's Hall, the extended stage, and 36 people fill that stage. And it's a large space at 3 meters. It is extraordinary how much space that takes per individual. And it's quite an eye-opener when you think, okay, there's no way that lot can act close together with a degree of safety. And the other thing, we have to remember is this, that obviously it's a tragic irony that singing and wind playing has become a dangerous occupation, things which bring joy to people. But we also need to consider the health of those people as well, that this is a disease which can have lasting effects on the respiratory system, and that is people's livelihoods. So I cannot put them in danger just in order to get something on where the long-term effects on those performers could be profound on their career. So there's 2 sides to the coin. It's not just our audience, it's actually the safety of our performers and their careers are at stake here.
Yeah, of course, that's very important. Of course, one of the legacies of COVID is streaming, and a lot of us have been watching opera on stream because we haven't online on digital platforms because we haven't been able to go to the live thing. Do you think that's going to be something that will last? Will we always see opera as a streamed activity as well as a live activity?
It's interesting because I think during this COVID period, we've learned a lot about working digitally. At the start, everyone put out their archives of existing performances pretty quickly, made the big error of doing it without charge. And we know from the stats we've been given that certainly people who watch it on their computers, they hang around for, I believe on average, 12 minutes. So it may look very great when you see how many views you've had, but when you really delve into the analytics and see how long they've been watching, it's not so encouraging, which gave us pause for thought, because before you invest in creating new work, you have to be sure there's an audience for it who are going to get out of it what you put in. Having said which, I think what we've learned as the months have gone on is there's a lot more potential than just capturing a performance, which was the way up until now. And certainly at WNO we captured Poulenc's La Voix Humaine, done in the bedroom of the singer, of Claire Booth, who was singing. It was in her own room, with a number of cameras positioned around, like voyeurs watching.
So I should just say La Voix Humaine, which is for a solo soprano, and it's very much an intimate piece that focuses on one singer.
And what was interesting, by asking her to really sing it, not to mime it, and the fact that she was on her own in her bedroom, not even with an audience, meant she was able to sing it in an incredibly intimate fashion. And yet you got the pain that the character Elle was going through precisely because she was singing and not miming. So I thought it was a very, very successful filmed version of an opera, but that's one person, of course.
Yes, I mean, perhaps Aida and the chorus, the big chorus numbers would not work so well.
But you know, the discussions we've been having at W&O are certainly about, maybe come spring, shooting something outdoors, but shot genuinely as a film. You know, you don't need a full Hollywood film crew now to do this. You can, you know, cameras are you know, of such high quality now. We can do this in a manageable way. So we are actually looking at this, and is this a thread we'd like to do in order to you know, to capture a new audience? And the lesson is not to issue it as in a 2-hour one block, but actually to issue it in short installments, maybe on a daily basis, but to you know, to engage people in that way. But also we've been looking at things like we have something coming out fairly soon around a big piece called Migrations, where we've asked the writers to reflect on art in a time of crisis, especially through a racial lens. And they've created their own pieces, some written, some we've set to music, and we're filming those again with the right filmic style for the piece itself. So that is that's a way we can embrace digital, not just thinking about putting AIDA on, but actually disseminating other work to a much wider audience.
And of course, understanding that the live experience is very different from the filmic experience. That perhaps one of the reasons why people only stay for 12 minutes on a film is a stream is that it hasn't been made for that medium, and therefore it doesn't really communicate well in that medium.
That's exactly right, and you have to think about what is the medium, and pick subject matter which is pertinent to that, which is why Love Are You Men is perfect, but other pieces wouldn't be. But I think, you know, the whole industry has thought about it. It's gone through the mistakes, which is a part of a learning path, and are looking at a form of digital work which is different from, I think, we thought it would be back in March when we entered this crisis.
And then the other sort of great sort of curveball that's been thrown in your direction is Brexit, which is about to happen, and you know, could be at a worse time. How prepared do you think any of us are, and particularly in terms of opera, which is an activity that relies on people being able to travel and to cross borders and to get the best singers you can. They come from all over the world. How's this going to really affect you?
So I think as a company, we plan with enough time to sort out visas and things. You know, for American singers, we have to do it anyway. So in that respect, it would be, of course, a pain and an extra workload for European singers if that is the way it goes. My real worry is precisely for those singers who have, you know, there's a whole generation who will divide their time between working in the UK and hopping over to Amsterdam or Brussels or Paris, or the concert singers, you know, who will often, their weekend will be spent in a European city performing in concert. And my worry is that in a competitive world market, or let's say European market, will a house like Amsterdam want to go through the bother of bringing a fantastic British singer over, but go through the paperwork when they could quite easily phone up a German?
So the sports world gets over this by having exceptional talent visas, and presumably we can do the same.
One would hope so, and I think we are hoping that will happen, but whether it does or not, it's difficult to know. I mean, even within football this week, was a bit of a curveball showing that it's not going to be quite so easy bringing European players into the teams as it was before.
Perhaps one of the problems with opera or singing or music is that you know, we don't really have a body that says this is an exceptional talent, and maybe that's what we need. I mean, how do we define exceptional talent? And you know, I mean, in a way, in sport, if you can jump higher, if you can, you know, swim faster, it's shown, but I mean, we're in a more subjective world, maybe.
It is. I mean, you know, if in America, what we had to put in a plea in Seattle for a singer coming over because they had to have the right visa, and it was very much in the lap of the visa officer to decide it, which was difficult. But you know, I gather the Met even had a problem with the singer, and the officer said, well, you know, what's the Met? Is that any good? I mean, literally, that's a true story. So it's so it's not easy, but I do feel in terms of getting the talent in with our the timelines, we should be able to accommodate that. But I do worry for the singers and artists themselves as to how their work opportunities are going to pan out in time.
So let's look at the idea of going back to where we started, what a general director is. What are the qualities that you need to run an opera house? And I mean, can you list, say, the 5 top things that you need to, if you were appointing somebody else to run an opera house?
Yeah, well, obviously you need to understand opera, and that means the opera business, and that means being at least aware of the imperatives of all aspects, which are fundamentally the fundraising side, the marketing side, the technical side, the artistic side. Very important, an understanding of we call it programs and engagement, that aspect of a company's life, which is only growing in importance. And also, as a motivator to the company, it's important to lead by inspiration rather than dictate. So I think you don't have to be an expert in all those things, but you need to understand in order to make the balanced decision. And there are times when every single one of those departments has an important imperative. And it's knowing, and I guess it's partly instinct, as to when you need to say yes to that and no to that, or vice versa. And I think the days of the autocratic approach and ones which say, we're doing this for the art, I think we've moved on from that. And I think that's because there's an understanding, you said it yourself earlier, that that art actually happens in the space between. It happens in that connection moment between what the event is and the audience reaction. And that is different from we have to do this because we think this is right. And I think the general director needs to be tuned into that, to have a real sense of who his audience is. And that's not to be slave to it. Otherwise you end up wall-to-wall Puccini. This is not to say, you do what audience research tells you people want, because you're never going to go anywhere. But you need to understand the experience on offer, that what we are creating are moments which we want to live in people's lives way beyond getting in the car after the show. I want them to wake up. Art is a fusion of emotion and thought. And the great advantage of opera, it always seems to me, is that the emotional level is hypercharged. But we can't wallow in that. There's no point in doing that without something, the purpose for those human interactions of the drama, which is built into the structure and meaning of the piece. So we just need to steer that happy medium, which changes from work to work, as to what its core purpose is.
So 2 things. There was this idea of a general manager or somebody who ran an opera company as being an impresario, essentially somebody who was sort of had a creative part in the process of the art. So think of Rudolph being, he was almost sort of a casting person. He, his taste in singers was what made the Met in the 50s and 60s. So how much do you get involved in creative process? Do you think of yourself as an artist or an administrator? Well, the job of the general director is both. Whereas the dual split makes it very clear, and actually you have to be an element of both. So of course, I have a view of what I want opera to be, which is exciting theatre, wonderfully sung. Therefore, when auditioning, I'm looking for singers who are going to communicate that text. They're going to communicate the idea. Of course, I want them to be able to sing it. That's an absolute given. But the tone of the general director sets the tone of the company, and that is the tone we have and are angling at W&O. But not all companies want that. In America, it was very clear. You get different companies there. Well, when you say tone, do you mean taste, or is it your own?
It is ultimately about taste, isn't it? But it's taste, but with a purpose. So yes, it's taste, but it's more than that. It's an attempt to marry a vision for what opera should be, with a receptiveness of the audience who you're dealing with, is what it's about. So yes, it's taste, but that shouldn't override the mission of a company, if you like. And you know, I would never mention names, but I can think of companies now where it's very much one person's taste. And I think that was, you know, it was a way of doing it, but I do think we've moved on.
Well, I think one of the interesting things for you was you inherited a company which was, in a way, I mean, it was David Boutney, who, and he's a big artistic personality who sort of, I wouldn't say imposed necessarily, but he sort of created a vision of his own sort of self in Welsh National Opera, and I suppose it's, you know, how much do you stand back as an individual, and how much are you the company in terms of, you know, how it all holds together? I mean, would you like your legacy to be Aidan Lang's Seattle or Aidan Lang's New Zealand Opera or Aidan Lang's Welsh National Opera? I mean, people do talk about companies in terms of
And certainly in Seattle, I mean, Spate Jenkins had been there 31 years, so it was very much Spate Jenkins. No, I don't want that actually. For me, what was achieved in Seattle was changing the audience, and it was nothing to do with me because I work as a team, and we built a team who were committed to doing that, and that became the underlying artistic mission. And it wasn't overt, because actually it takes time. It takes 5 or so years for people to realise something's different. I would rather, in 5 years' time, Welsh National Opera audiences saying, you know, it's different, but I don't quite know how we got there, than it being, oh, this is different, because somebody will love it, some will hate it, and you create a period of uncertainty. And I think as long as you're always evolving, it also means that you can remain receptive to new changes in audience dynamic and in the way art fits in with society. Because we do it for the audience. You know, our purpose is not to create interesting, fascinating, you know, pieces. It's to create a reaction in the audience through the means of creating interesting, fascinating.
But of course, that reaction is unpredictable, and it's also something you don't want to predict. You don't want to say, let's do this because the audience will feel like this. You actually want to create work
Absolutely.
that surprises and that stimulates and that perhaps takes an audience into a different space to something they expect. So there's that difficulty. But let me put you on the spot a bit more about taste. What would you say were Aidan Lang productions? If you look at the productions you've made in the various places that you've been, what are you most proud of?
Yeah. I'll tell you, there was a production of Rigoletto we did in New Zealand, which I know then, it was done by Lindy Humes, an Australian director. It played in a couple of cities in Australia. And Australia and New Zealand are different, the opera audiences are different. But then it went to, I took it to Seattle, but I'd come here, so I never saw it. And it was a major success there. And, you know, it was inspired by Silvio Berlusconi, so it was dead contemporary. And what I loved about it was that I didn't get a single letter saying, Mr. Lang, it's modern, because everyone got it. It was crystal clear, and it was that clarity, and the fact they had the same reaction in America, which as I said earlier, is not a Kiwi audience. So I'm thinking of production which have set their stall very carefully, and that was a modern production, but were given with a consummate clarity of vision, which translated itself to the audience, so the audience got it and surprised them. And you're absolutely right. The way to build an audience is through surprise and delight. That I did not expect to like that is the best reaction, because that's what's going to make someone come again. If you're always feeding what people want, then you're not going to build it. You're just going to tick along. So for me, the most successful productions I've put on have ones which have actually stood the test of being seen elsewhere. Is a really good touch point to if it has is being directed just to a local taste, or whether there's something more profound baked in. Now, you can't often get that, but it's a good comparison point. But ones which get to the kernel of a piece in an arresting theatrical way, but actually have not put people off because they haven't understood it, that have enhanced their lives. And that's what we're there for.
And in America, of course, you are answerable not only to your audience, but to your patrons, to people, well, who are your audience as well, but to people who give a lot of money. And you know, things are funded differently. So in America, there's a very little government funding. There's a lot of patronage. There's a lot of sponsorship. There's a lot of individual giving and quite powerful boards that you have to talk to, who presumably are also saying, well, I didn't like this and I didn't like that. Whereas presumably here, you're a bit freer. I don't know.
No, you know, I wouldn't. I sort of expected that in America, and actually, yeah, you hear stories of, you know, the Met occasionally putting on something for some donor who's giving $5 million. But actually, I never found that, and to be honest, none of my colleagues ever said that they had felt they'd been forced into something by a board. Certainly the Seattle board were absolutely up for something different and engaging, and accepted that not everything is going to be a success. But I think it's it may have happened in the past, but I think American boards are in it to facilitate the vision of the company. So that's the important thing. We call within the UK framework, WNO is a charity. And I always think charity is the wrong word because it just gives a wrong association. So we never use it. Whereas Americans use the phrase a mission-led non-profit. And I think that captures much better. And also because the board members are like, they have a minimum gift anyway. So they have all made a substantial gift to the company, but they are like the shareholders, or donors are like the shareholders, but are doing it for a philanthropic purpose. And there's also tax breaks as well, so there is government money, but at one remove. And I think if your vision is made clear, then people are buying into a vision rather than wanting to just tell you what's there. Otherwise, they can just buy tickets. So I think I understood the philanthropic impulse better having been in America than elsewhere. And it is philanthropy, which is a word we tend not to use so much here. They are investing in their city, in their community, and respecting that a city like Seattle needs a great opera company, so they're willing to support in that way. So there is a genuine philanthropy, which I think it's quite hard in the UK for us to understand that because it's not baked into our psyche in any way. So it's not quite as restricting as I thought it was going to be. I absolutely thought I was going to have to be, doing what people wanted.
Yeah, well, let's start sort of bringing all this together. And you've gone in a sort of a circle. You started at Welsh Opera. You from Welsh. I think you go straight from.
I actually did Glyndebourne first for a couple of years, and then joined WO in mid-80s.
Right. And you're now back there. What have you learnt? I mean, what are your great sort of nuggets of wisdom that you brought back with you, having done this tour of a tour of the world?
I think what I've learned through the whole career path, from being a director to an artistic director, working in partnership to being general director, I've learnt the purpose of what we do. And that's for me is crucial.
Can you articulate that?
Yeah, the purpose is to create, what's the word I want? Resonant moments in people's lives which make them see the world a little bit differently. There's the answer, or wonderful saying, we transform people's lives, and it all sounds very airy-fairy, and I used to think it was airy-fairy until I thought about it and realized that if you can define the experience in the audience member you're offering, and if that experience is as intense enough and as thought-provoking enough to make them wake up the next morning and deal with a fellow human being in a slightly altered way, then you have actually transformed someone's life. This isn't about, St. Paul to Damascus moments of vision. It's about showing human truths through the medium of storytelling and acting out, which is the most potent way of people understanding human behavior, because they're understanding through empathy, not by being lectured at. If you can let that be your guiding star, and that's, I say my career journey has helped me understand that, then I think that is, that's what we're there to do. And, for me, that is, well, that's our purpose. Our purpose is to create extraordinary moments for our audiences, and via the medium of works which are either brand new or written, which are ever open to different interpretations. Great,
thank you very much indeed. I think that's a great way of winding that up, and but perhaps just say a little bit about what we can expect from Welsh National Opera when you're back in action, and what should we come and see, and particularly for people who perhaps are just putting a toe into the water. Yeah. We have a wonderful opera club here at Cooper Hall, and people are just sort of starting out on a journey often.
And we're not that far away.
We're not that far away. So tell us a little bit about how we can enhance and enrich our journey too.
Well, I think the most exciting project we have coming up, and it's one that David set in place and it got postponed, is a piece called Migrations. It's a new opera by Will Todd with 5 different sets of librettists, and it's, as the title would imply, it's a piece about migration, about immigration, and it's told through a number of different viewpoints. One is the Pilgrim Fathers, who of course were fleeing religious persecution. It's important to remember. We also see them hitting the States, and we then have another set of stories set actually in Canada with the Cree Indians, both earlier and the treaty which they signed with the British, and then the effects of that 100 years later, as the subject of who owns the land as an oil company putting a pipeline through it. So there's looked at that way. There's another very poignant story about a slave in the 18th century who worked in Bristol, true story. So who was double removed from Africa to the West Indies, and then removed from his family to come and work in a wealthy slave owner's house in Britain. There's a story which is told through, which our youth chorus are going to do, called Flight, and it's about the natural instinct of birds. So they're all birds, but of course is a sideways look at humans' desire to always to migrate. And then it's interspersed with 2 other stories, one of which is called The English Lesson, and it takes a number of refugees who've just left wherever they've come from and are learning English together, and via a number of questions like, what do you do? And they all reflect on what their previous lives were and how it's changed. And then the 6th story is which is a humorous tale, but really with a sting, set in the late 60s, where a couple of doctors from India have come over, promised the riches, to join the NHS, and then facing the reality of bigotry and prejudice as they're only trying to fulfill. So this piece darts around from one story to the next, and looking at it, I have such hopes for a piece which especially was what has happened in the past months, has an incredible resonance. In fact, a deeper resonance than had we done it last September. And that's an example, I think, it's a huge investment for the company. It's got a gospel choir in it. It's got, obviously, our youth chorus. We've got a Bollywood scene as well. So we're bringing performers into the company, not just, members of our own troupe. And it's a great example of a company putting on a piece which is of our time, is unashamed to be put on our main stage, and has the potential to let opera speak to a far wider audience than we normally would.
Well, I think that would certainly address accusations of opera being, a museum piece and irrelevant. I mean, I think opera has lots of urgent things to say about today, and it sounds like this piece is one of them. But also, I would say, come and see the Traviatas, come and see the Carmens, because they still have immense resonance. And the idea that music and opera and theatre, they kind of inhabit your soul, don't they? They can allow you to empathise. And I can empathise with a Spanish gypsy who's, suddenly I can feel
that's exactly right.
what she's going through. And I think there are very few other media that allow you to experience in such a visceral way what other human beings are experiencing. And I think that's something that opera, through that combination of music and storytelling, can do. It can make you feel that person's joy, pain, grief, and that's what people should go to opera for.
And it is the visceral nature of unamplified human seeing, ultimately, which does that. And we know that. We know when we go into classrooms and young students are blown away by the power of a voice and the way it cuts into you. And it's important to remember that is, that's why it's important that we get back into theatres performing live as soon as we can, because there's nothing quite like it.
Aidan, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you today about how to run an opera company. I feel I could do it myself now. Wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon.
Ash, it's been great. Thank you.
Thank you.